Jessica's suitcases were gone when I got home. That was the first thing I noticed. Not a note, not her voice, just empty space where her luggage used to sit beside the closet. The apartment felt too quiet, like the air itself had stopped moving. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, waiting for her to walk out from the bedroom and tell me I was overreacting. But she didn't. "Jessica?" I called, my voice echoing against the walls. No answer. I walked through our apartment slowly, already knowing what I would find. The bathroom counter was clear of her makeup. The closet had gaps where her dresses had hung just yesterday. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a ghost of something that no longer existed. On the kitchen table I found it. A single piece of notebook paper. 7 sentences ended 5 years of my life. She had met someone at yoga. Someone fun. Someone who wasn't always exhausted from work. She hoped I would understand. She had already taken her things. She was sorry. I read the note 3 times before it finally sank in. "My name is Daniel Harper, and that Tuesday in March destroyed me." But 6 months later, when my CEO showed up at my door in a rainstorm, everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be wrong. I called in sick the next day. I couldn't face the office. I couldn't face the pity in people's eyes or the quiet questions they wouldn't dare ask. But by Thursday morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Work emails piled up. My team lead wanted the quarterly reports. And then there was a message from Victoria Chun, our CEO, asking if I could join a client call in an hour. I had to go in. I had to pretend I was fine. Vertex Technologies occupied 3 floors of a glass building downtown. I had worked there for 6 years, starting as a junior project manager fresh out of college. Now I was head of product development, managing a team of 12 people who built software for manufacturing plants. Complex systems that controlled assembly lines, tracked inventory, and predicted equipment failures before they happened. Victoria Chun founded Vertex 8 years ago. She had been a programmer at a larger tech company when she saw a gap in the market and quit to build something better. She started with 3 people in a startup incubator. Now we had over 400 employees and clients in 15 countries. She was 36, brilliant, and a little intimidating. Victoria remembered everything. If you said something in a meeting 6 months ago, she would bring it up when it mattered. 2 years ago, when I was promoted to head of product development, I began working directly with her almost every day. Long planning sessions in her office. Problem-solving meetings that stretched into the evening. She would order tea for both of us from the cafe downstairs, always getting mine right with honey and lemon, even though I had only mentioned it once. She had a way of making terrible jokes funny. I would make some stupid pun about debugging code, and she would actually laugh. Not a polite boss laugh, but a real one that made her eyes shine. Sometimes, late on Friday afternoons when everyone else had left, we talked about things beyond work. She told me about her parents, who immigrated from Taiwan with almost nothing, about the restaurant they built in San Francisco, and how they worked 7 days a week for 20 years. Watching them, she said, taught her that success came from showing up every single day, even when you wanted to quit. I shared things too. My dream of photographing national parks. The vintage Canon camera I was restoring. The books I was reading late at night. Those conversations made something shift in my chest. They made me excited to come to work on Mondays. They made me stay late on Thursdays, hoping she might stop by. But she was my boss, and I was engaged, so I pushed those feelings down where they couldn't cause problems. When I returned to the office that Thursday after Jessica left, everything was strangely normal. People said good morning. My team lead asked about the reports. The coffee machine was broken again. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen while my mind felt like static. An hour later, Victoria's assistant appeared. "Victoria wants to see you." Quote, my stomach dropped. Had I missed something? Forgotten a deadline? I walked to her office on the top floor, rehearsing excuses. Victoria sat behind her desk, the city skyline stretching behind her through massive windows. She looked up when I entered, and her expression wasn't angry. It was concerned. "Close the door and sit down," she said gently. I did. I heard about Jessica, she said quietly. I'm really sorry, Daniel. My throat tightened. How did you know? Your team lead mentioned you called in sick. That's not like you. I called to check on you, and you sounded off. So I looked at your emergency contacts in HR and called your brother. I hope that's okay. I nodded because I couldn't speak. Here's what we're going to do, she continued. You'll work from home Monday through Thursday for as long as you need. Come in on Fridays for essential meetings only. I'm extending your project deadlines by 3 weeks, and if you need to take a full week off, just let me know. I stared at her, stunned. This was the same Victoria Chun who once made a team work through a holiday weekend to meet a client deadline. Thank you, I managed. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, she replied softly. Just take care of yourself first. She handed me a business card. That's a therapist my friend recommended when she went through a divorce. Your insurance covers it. I took the card, feeling something crack open in my chest. This is really kind. You're a valuable part of this company, Daniel, she said. And more importantly, you're a person going through something terrible. The work will be here when you're ready. That arrangement saved me. Working from home gave me space to fall apart without an audience. Victoria checked in regularly, first with quick emails about reports, then with more personal messages asking if I had eaten or gone outside. Late-night calls became our routine. We talked about work, but also about life, dreams, and fears. Those conversations became the best part of my day. 5 months passed, and slowly I began to feel like myself again. Then Vertex announced the acquisition of our biggest competitor, NextCore Systems. Victoria appointed me to lead the integration team. The workload was crushing. I worked 15-hour days, then 16, then 17. The late-night calls stopped. My apartment became a disaster. My camera gathered dust. I began making mistakes. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. My hands shook constantly. Sleep became impossible. During a critical presentation to NextCore executives, I stumbled through my slides, confused and exhausted. When the call ended, I sat in silence, unable to breathe properly. That night, I realized something had to change. At 2 a.m, I wrote my resignation letter. The next day, I handed it to Victoria. You're one of the best people I've worked with, she said quietly. Losing you will hurt this company. It will hurt me personally. I left Vertex 2 weeks later with a cardboard box and a handshake from HR. I told myself it was freedom. But it felt like something important had been left unfinished. 3 days later, on a rainy Tuesday night, the doorbell rang at exactly 8:17 p.m. I grabbed my wallet, expecting the pizza I had ordered, and opened the door without checking the peephole. Victoria Chun stood on my doorstep. She was soaked from the rain I hadn't even noticed was falling. Her white shirt clung to her, and her dark hair hung in damp strands around her face. She held a folder against her chest, as if it were protecting her. We stared at each other, neither of us speaking. You could leave the office, she said, her voice trembling. But not me. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand still gripping my wallet, unable to process what I was seeing. Victoria Chun, CEO of Vertex Technologies, was standing on my doorstep, soaked from the rain, looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. Can I come in? She asked softly. I stepped aside without thinking. Of course. She walked into my apartment, and suddenly I saw it through her eyes. A pizza box sat open on the coffee table. Laundry I meant to fold was piled on a chair. Camera parts were spread across newspapers on the floor where I'd been cleaning a lens earlier. Sorry about the mess, I said quickly. I wasn't expecting anyone. She turned to face me, still holding the folder against her chest. Up close, I could see that she was trembling, not from the cold, but from nerves. I've never done this before, she said quietly. Never shown up at someone's home uninvited. Never crossed this line. I'm not your employee anymore, I replied, finding my voice. Exactly, she said, taking a slow breath. That's exactly why I'm here. She held out the folder. I took it, confused, and opened it. Inside was a detailed job proposal, Employee Wellness Director. Fully remote position. Flexible hours. The description outlined programs for mental health support, work-life balance, and employee care. The salary was generous, more than generous. "You created a position for me?" I asked, looking up in disbelief. "For you," she said, "and for everyone else who needs it. You understand burnout because you lived it. You know what employees need. You'd be perfect for this role." I stared at the papers, overwhelmed. "Victoria, you could have emailed this. Why are you here?" She hesitated, her eyes dropping to her hands before meeting mine again. "Because this isn't just about the job," she said. "I could have sent an email. I could have had HR reach out next week. But I needed to come here myself. I needed you to understand something." "Understand what?" I asked quietly. She took a step closer. "Those late-night calls we had over the past 6 months, when we talked about books and life and dreams, those became the best part of my day, the only part that felt real." My heart began to pound. "When you handed me that resignation letter," she continued, her voice trembling slightly, "when I realized those conversations would end, that I wouldn't hear your voice or your laugh or your thoughts anymore, I couldn't accept it." "Victoria," I whispered, my throat tight. "What are you saying?" She met my eyes, vulnerability shining through the composure she always wore like armor. "I'm saying I spent 3 days trying to talk myself out of coming here. I drove past your building twice tonight before I finally parked. This is terrifying for me, Daniel. I've built my entire life on being professional, on maintaining boundaries. But when you resigned, something broke. I realized all those rules, all those walls I built were keeping me from something that actually mattered." "What?" I asked, even though I already knew. "You," she said simply. "You matter to me, not as an employee, not as a colleague, as someone I can't stop thinking about. As someone who makes me laugh when I'm stressed and challenges me when I'm wrong, and sees me as a person, not just a CEO." I set the folder down on the couch, my hands unsteady. "I thought about you too," I admitted, "during those calls and after them. I'd sit there in the dark replaying every word. But I told myself it was stupid. You were my boss. I was a mess. It couldn't happen." "I'm not your boss anymore," she said softly. "No," I agreed. "You're not." "Then maybe it could happen now," she whispered. "Maybe we could figure out what this is, if you want to." I looked at her standing in my messy apartment, her expensive clothes dripping rain onto my carpet. Victoria Chan, who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions, was standing here nervous and uncertain, taking the biggest risk of her life. "I want to," I said quietly. "I really want to, but I need to understand something first." "Anything," she said. "Why now? Why show up tonight instead of last week when I was still at Vertex?" She smiled faintly, as if the answer were obvious. "Because I couldn't complicate your decision. You needed to resign. You needed to choose yourself. If I told you how I felt while you were still my employee, it would have made everything harder. You might have stayed for the wrong reasons or left feeling confused. I couldn't do that to you, so I waited until there was no power imbalance, until you were free to say yes or no without worrying about your career." Her words settled deep in my chest. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Tyler's name lit up the screen, probably checking in again. The sound broke the moment between us. Victoria stepped back, her professional composure beginning to return. "I should go," she said quietly. "This was inappropriate. I'm sorry for just showing up." "No," I said firmly. I silenced my phone without looking at it. "Stay, please." She hesitated, her hand hovering near the door. "Why?" "Because I want you to," I said. "Because I've been replaying every one of those calls in my head for days. Because when I opened the door and saw you standing there, it felt like I could breathe properly for the first time since I left Vertex." Her hand dropped slowly from the doorknob. She turned back to face me. "I've been sitting in my car outside your building for 40 minutes, she admitted. "I drove past twice yesterday, once the day before. I kept telling myself this was inappropriate, that I was your boss, that you had just gone through a breakup and didn't need this complication." "But," I prompted gently. "But I couldn't stop thinking about you," she said with a shaky laugh. "Do you know how many board meetings I sat through this week where I had no idea what anyone was saying because I was thinking about you? How many times I picked up my phone to call you and remembered I didn't have that right anymore?" I stepped closer, closing the small distance between us. "You have that right," I said softly. "I'm not your employee. I'm just me, and you're not my boss. You're just you." "Just me" is terrifying, she whispered. "I'm not good at this, Daniel. I built a company because companies make sense. Rules and structures and logic. This doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to," I replied gently. "Sometimes the best things don't." We stood there in silence as the rain drummed harder against the windows. "Come sit down," I finally said. "Let me make some tea. We can just talk like we used to." She nodded and followed me into the kitchen. I filled the kettle while she leaned against the counter, watching me with soft eyes. "Your apartment is nice," she said politely. "It's honest," I replied with a small smile. "No pretending here." She smiled back, a real smile that made my chest tighten. "I like honest." As the water heated, she glanced around at the photography magazines on the counter and the camera parts on the table. "You're still working on this," she said. "It helps me think," I explained. "When everything fell apart, I couldn't focus on anything else. Working on these little pieces reminded me that broken things can be fixed if you are patient enough." She looked at me thoughtfully. "Is that what you think you are? Broken?" I considered her question as I poured hot water into 2 mugs. "I was," I said quietly. "Maybe I still am in some ways, but I'm working on it." I handed her a mug, and our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled away. She took a sip, then looked at me over the rim of the cup. "I've been afraid." "Of what?" I asked gently. "Of this," she admitted. "Of caring about someone this much. Of what it means if I'm wrong about you. And of what it means if I'm right." I set my mug down and reached for her hand. "You drove past my building twice," I said softly. "You sat in your car for 40 minutes. You came to my door in the rain. That doesn't sound like someone who's unsure." "I'm terrified," she whispered. "So am I," I admitted. "But maybe that means it matters." She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. I held her gaze, my heart steady for the first time in months. "That depends," I said softly, "on whether you believe there's room in your life for this, for us." Victoria didn't answer right away. She stood there in my small kitchen, her hand still in mine, the rain tapping steadily against the windows. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It felt full, like something important was about to be said but needed the right moment to arrive. "There's room," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I just don't know how to make room for something I've never allowed myself to have." I watched her closely. Victoria Chun, the woman who commanded boardrooms and built an empire from nothing, looked uncertain for the first time since I'd known her. "What have you never allowed yourself to have?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Someone who matters more than work." The honesty in her voice settled deep in my chest. "I spent my whole life proving myself," she continued. "To investors, to clients, to my parents. I built Vertex because I wanted something that was mine. And somewhere along the way, work became everything. It was easier that way, predictable, safe." "And lonely?" I asked quietly. Her eyes met mine. "Yes, lonely." I squeezed her hand. "You don't have to be lonely anymore." She let out a soft breath, as if she had been holding it for years. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't," I said with a small smile, "but some things are worth the risk." She studied my face, her gaze warm and searching. "You're not afraid?" "I am," I admitted. "I'm afraid of caring this much, afraid of getting hurt again. But when you showed up at my door tonight, none of that mattered. For the first time since I left Vertex, I felt like I could breathe." Her expression softened. "I felt the same when you opened the door." We stood there for a moment, the distance between us disappearing completely. The world outside faded into the sound of rain and the quiet rhythm of our breathing. "I almost told you that day in my office," she said softly, "when you handed me a resignation. I wanted to ask you to stay, not for Vertex, but for me. But you were already carrying so much. I couldn't add my feelings to that weight." "I needed to leave," I said, "not because of you. I had lost myself in the work and in the heartbreak. But those calls we had, Victoria, those were the only times I felt like myself." She smiled gently and squeezed my hand. "What happens now?" That depends, I said, meeting her gaze, on whether you believe there's room in your life for this, for us, for whatever this might become. Quote. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see tiny droplets of rain still clinging to her hair. I spent my whole life planning everything. 5-year strategies, growth projections, but this, I can't plan this. Maybe that's the point, I said softly. Maybe the best things can't be planned. She laughed quietly, and the sound warmed something deep inside me. The CEO disappeared, replaced by the woman I had come to know during those late-night calls. Just Victoria, looking at me as if I were something precious. Dinner tomorrow night, she said. Just us. No business talk, no pressure. Just two people getting to know each other. We already know each other pretty well, I said with a grin. Do we? She challenged playfully. Tell me something I don't know about you. I thought for a moment, then smiled. I'm terrified of this, of us, of how much I want this to work. She reached up and touched my face gently, her fingers warm against my skin. Me too. But being terrified means it matters. My heart pounded as I leaned closer. The space between us disappeared, and for a moment we simply looked at each other, both understanding what was about to happen. Then I kissed her. It was soft and brief, just a gentle brush of lips, but it felt like a promise. When I pulled back, she kept her eyes closed for a moment, as if savoring the feeling. When she opened them again, they were bright. Tomorrow night, she said quietly. 7 o'clock, I'll pick you up. It's a date, I replied, smiling. We both laughed, the sound light and unexpected. After everything we had been through, it came down to something as simple as a date. At the door, she paused and turned back to me. The rain had softened to a steady whisper outside. Thank you, she said. For what? I asked. For being brave enough to want this even though you're scared. We both are, I reminded her. Yes, she said with a smile. But we're doing it anyway. I watched as she stepped out into the night, the rain glistening on the pavement. She turned back once before getting into her car, catching me watching her through the doorway. She raised her hand in a small wave, and I returned it, feeling lighter than I had in months. After she drove away, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a slow breath. The apartment no longer felt empty. The silence was no longer heavy. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Tyler's name lit up the screen. You okay? I smiled as I typed back. Yeah. Actually, I think I am. The next evening, I stood in front of my closet, staring at a row of shirts as if they held the answers to life's biggest questions. I had been nervous before presentations to executives, before million-dollar deals, before leading teams through impossible deadlines. But none of that compared to the nervous excitement I felt now. This wasn't about work. This was about her. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Victoria standing there, elegant and composed, wearing a navy dress that made her eyes shine. She held a small smile that was both confident and shy. You look amazing, she said. So do you, I replied, unable to stop smiling. Ready? She asked. Ready, I said, stepping out into the evening beside her. As we walked toward her car, our hands brushed, and this time neither of us pulled away. The city lights shimmered around us, and for the first time since Jessica had left, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt full of possibility. Victoria opened the passenger door for me, and I hesitated for a second before getting in. The gesture was simple, but it carried a warmth that made my chest tighten. She walked around the car, her heels clicking softly against the pavement, and slid into the driver's seat. You, nervous? She asked with a small smile as she started the engine. Terrified, I admitted, laughing softly, but in a good way. Good, she said, glancing at me, because I am too. The city lights blurred past as we drove downtown. She had chosen a quiet restaurant tucked between two historic buildings, a place with warm lighting, soft music, and just enough distance from the world outside to feel private. It wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtful, and that made it perfect. As we sat across from each other, the candlelight flickered between us, illuminating the gentle curve of her smile. For the first time since I had known her, there were no meetings, no deadlines, and no expectations. Just Victoria and me. "I've never done this before," she admitted, tracing the rim of her glass. "Not like this, dating someone I once worked with. Taking a risk without knowing the outcome." "I've never dated a CEO," I replied lightly, earning a soft laugh from her. "But I think we'll figure it out." We ordered dinner and talked the way we always had during our late-night calls, easily and honestly. She told me stories about her parents, restaurant in San Francisco, about washing dishes at 8 and taking orders at 10. I shared my plans to photograph national parks, to drive from park to park with no schedule and capture the world through my lens. "You should do it," she said softly. "Not someday, soon." "Maybe I will," I replied, "especially now that I'm not chained to a desk." Quote. Her eyes sparkled. "And if you accept the wellness director position?" "I might," I said thoughtfully, "not because I need a job, but because I believe in what it stands for. Helping people find balance. Helping them choose themselves before they lose everything." She smiled, her gaze warm and proud. "That's exactly why I created it, for you. And because you deserve to do something that makes you happy." Dinner stretched into hours. We talked about dreams, fears, childhood memories, and everything in between. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation, only the quiet realization that what we shared had been growing long before we dared to acknowledge it. When we finally stepped outside, the night air was cool and gentle. The city shimmered around us, alive with possibility. We walked slowly down the sidewalk, neither of us in a hurry to end the evening. "I'm glad you came to my door," I said softly, even if it was terrifying. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "So am I. I almost didn't. I kept telling myself it was too risky, too unprofessional, too complicated, but the thought of never seeing you again was worse." I stopped walking and turned to face her. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." "Not with me." She stepped closer, her expression open and vulnerable. "I'm still afraid, but for the first time it feels worth it." I reached for her hand, intertwining our fingers. "It is." We stood there for a moment, the world fading away around us. The past, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, and the uncertainty that once defined my life felt distant now. All that remained was the quiet certainty of what stood before me. She looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel, I don't know where this will lead, but I know I don't want to walk away from it." "You don't have to," I said softly. "We'll figure it out together." She smiled, and this time it was free of hesitation. I leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She didn't. Our lips met in a gentle, lingering kiss, warm and certain, filled with promise rather than fear. When we parted, she rested her forehead against mine. "So, what happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," I said, smiling, "we see where this goes, one step at a time." She laughed softly. "You know, for someone who quit his job to find himself, you seem surprisingly calm." "That's because I already found what I was looking for," I said, meeting her gaze. Her eyes softened. "And what was that?" "You," I answered simply. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she squeezed my hand, her smile radiant and sincere. "Then I guess this is just the beginning," she said. "It is." I agreed. We walked back to her car together, our hands still intertwined. The city lights shimmered above us, and the future stretched ahead, wide and bright with possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. After everything I had lost, I had found something unexpected, something real. And as I watched Victoria smile at me, I knew with quiet certainty that leaving the office had been the bravest decision of my life. Because sometimes choosing yourself is what leads you to the person who was meant to find you all along.